Did President Obama miss something? Senator John McCain tweeting, President Obama claims intel community missed ISIS threat, but Senator Graham and I saw it. And Senator McCain joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta.
Well, I saw the tweet, I read the tweet, and I also read that back on October 30th, 2013, you had an op-ed that is just blistering, laying out exactly what you thought would happen and did happen. How does the president miss this?
Because he campaigned and actually was able to get the Democrat nomination by being against anything in Iraq, and he refused to recognize the reality. He refused to pursue the effort to have a stabilizing force left behind, which, by the way, recently Ambassador Ryan Crocker, among others, authenticated we could have left a stabilizing force behind, and has continued to misjudge and is continuing not to do enough. And could I just talk about that, what's happening now for a second, Greta? That is, we're going to need more boots on the ground. We're going to need more robust airstrikes. ISIS is still on the move. They can't take Baghdad, but it's very possible that they could attack Baghdad. We're going to have more boots on the ground. In Syria, tragically, there is no coordination or cooperation with the Free Syrian Army for the air attacks there. In fact, Bashar Assad is moving into these places that the attacks are moving ISIS out of and making it worse for the Free Syrian Army. And finally, some of those shots you see of buildings hit by the missiles so accurately, some of those buildings were already empty because we gave them ample warning.
You know, Senator, I don't mean to kick him when he's down, but he said on 60 Minutes 2 nights ago, essentially that James Clapper, DNI underestimated this, that he overestimated the ability of the Iraqi army to fight. And I guess what's so disturbing and why I go back to this is because if he's missing this, when people pointed it out to him over and over again, that what's he missing right now as we go forward? And I go to your article back from October 30th, in which you write in part, since the withdrawal of U.S. forces in the beginning of the conflict in Syria in 2011, Al-Qaeda is on the rise again in Iraq, so no surprise there, you said it. It now possesses a safe haven that spans Iraqi and Syrian territory and has grown into the larger and more lethal Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham. ISIS is recruiting foreign fighters from across the Middle East and is accelerating its pace of attacks. Now, how is it that you and Senator Lindsey Graham knew so much about this in October of last year that you wrote it publicly? Then in January, the president says it's JV. Now he's saying that it was underestimated by the director of national intelligence. This is disturbing, because if he's not paying attention, as we go forward, we got even bigger problems.
Well, first of all, it's the dog ate my homework excuse. Since when is the president not responsible? He acts like he's a bystander when, in fact, he made the final decisions and even overrode on a couple of occasions his entire national security team, or certainly most of it. But I think the other problem here is that the president does not understand fundamentals of warfare, and I'm afraid a lot of these decisions are being made by him and Susan Rice and other people who have no experience or background in the military and the effects or lack of effects of air power. And believe me, ISIS now is dispersing like cockroaches into populated areas, and we're going to have boots on the ground. But Lindsey Graham and I will predict now we're going to have boots on the ground in Syria, and we're going to have to arm the Free Syrian Army. And by the way, that's 5,000 against 31,000 ISIS. That's not a fair fight. We have to have a no-fly zone over the Free Syrian Army and not let Bashar Assad to continue to slaughter them with his barrel bombs.
All right, two questions. One is, you say that he does not understand, but I guess that I'm not even sure that he is working from the same facts, because the facts are laid out about the growing threat and he's ignored it. You say he doesn't understand. I think it frankly looks like it's been ignored. So I want to know, is it that he's ignoring what's going on, what the facts were, or that he wasn't understanding it? You said not understand.
Well, only attending 42% of his intelligence briefs, I think, gives you an indication of the priority that he has for it, but for this issue. But he seems to want to stick to this, lead from behind, don't do stupid stuff. He fails to understand, even though he said in the 60 Minutes interview, they don't go to Russia, they don't go to China, they come to the United States, which, by the way, it doesn't take a lot of deduction, but he wants to withdraw. That's the way he got the nomination. That's why how he was elected and reelected. The way he ridiculed Mitt Romney in the debate that they had. It's willful ignorance, in my view, because he is a very intelligent man, and he's willfully ignoring the facts on the ground, and he's being dragged step by step in every measure that Lindsey Graham and I 2 years ago and more said there's going to have to be taken.
All right, well, people can read the article themselves. I posted on Greta Wire, and they can see the date of it and the facts laid out in the predictions. Senator McCain, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Greta.
And right now, Fox News has obtained a copy of an internal memo from Director of National Intelligence James Clapper to his intelligence community staff. So what's in the Clapper memo? Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us. Catherine, what's in this memo?
Well, thank you, Greta. I have a copy of the memo right here, and this is the kind of memo that gets sent out to members of the intelligence community typically after a major controversy. And given the timing, it seems clearly to be a response to the president's interview earlier this week on 60 Minutes, where he blamed the intelligence community for the rise of ISIS. And the memo is interesting because it specifically says that for 2 years, the intelligence community, and I'm reading from it directly, monitored, assessed, and called attention to the expansion of ISIS. So that is the case of the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. But on the other token, on the other hand, what he says is that none of us could have foreseen what was in the minds of these ISIS fighters, and they were so committed, or that the Iraqi military would collapse. But people who have dealt with the intelligence for years say that that just simply doesn't wash. For example, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, their job is to assess the militaries of foreign governments.
You know, sort of interesting contrast. I mean, this memo that I got a copy from you, obviously, in contrast to what Senator McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham said in October 30th of last year. I mean, apparently the department, the DNI was monitoring a very different conflict than Senator McCain and Senator Graham were.
Well, this memo seems to lay bare, I would argue, that the intelligence community is making this statement, which I think is somewhat in conflict with what the president said earlier this week, that for 2 years they were monitoring, assessing, and drawing attention to the intelligence. I mean, that to me is no longer in dispute. The question is whether and why the president and his team failed to act. And I think you have to ask yourself whether some of that really lies in the lap of the DNI, James Clapper. Critics have said to me, who've worked in the intelligence community, that they believe after he was on Capitol Hill with Senator Wyden, and he said, wrongly, that they were not doing data collection on American citizens, that because he did not resign, he kept his job. In some ways, he had lost his authority to be a really forceful advocate for the intelligence community with the administration. Maybe that's a fair criticism. Maybe it's not a fair criticism, but that's certainly the facts in this case.
All right, well, you very politely say wrongfully. A lot of people would say that was a lie. But anyway, Catherine, thank you very much.
I try to be polite.
Indeed you
Okay.
are. Thank you,
thank
Catherine.
You.
So is DNI Clapper's memo to his staff a slap in the face to his boss, President Obama? Former UN Ambassador John Bolton joins us. Good evening, sir.
Glad to be with you.
And I should add that this memo that I got from Catherine Herridge, the headline is it from the DNI, your vital commitment. It's like rah, rah, rah to the people who works for him.
Well, the conclusion of the memo basically is nobody could have seen this. We were out there doing our job, but we didn't fail because nobody could have understood the threat that ISIS posed or the weaknesses of the Iraqi army. And that simply contradicts what were public statements on the record by U.S. diplomatic and military officials as far ago as 12 months, where they were basically saying this threat is growing and the Iraqi army is probably not up to it. The director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, for example, said that. So I think Clapper's trying to walk a fine line. He's not ducking the president, saying Jim Clapper made the mistake. He's trying to tell his people we were doing our job, but, you know, nobody could have done it. It was beyond human comprehension, and it's simply not true.
Well, just as a point of reference, if you just go to Greta Wire and see the article that was written by Senator John McCain and Lindsey Graham a year ago, maybe they should be working with DNI, because it has a vastly different analysis of the situation in the White House, at least is now suggesting by this. Let me turn the corner to Prime Minister Netanyahu meeting today with President Obama in the Oval Office. What's your assessment of this meeting, at least to the extent we know what happened? A lot of it was in secret.
Right. Well, I think on Netanyahu's mind, obviously the predominant subject was Iran, still trying to wake up President Obama to the risks that he's running on behalf of the United States, Israel, our Arab friends in the Middle East, to try and reach a negotiated settlement with Iran that will effectively leave Iran's nuclear weapons program untouched. And there was a dramatic contrast today that as Netanyahu was meeting with Obama, the State Department was saying that the construction of new apartment buildings in East Jerusalem called into question Israel's fundamental commitment to reaching peace with the Palestinians. So here's Bibi Netanyahu talking about Iran's nuclear weapons program, and here's the State Department talking about that even greater threat, Israeli construction of apartments in East Jerusalem. It just boggles the mind.
And, of course, anyone who has some time should go on the Internet, watch Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech before for the General Assembly this week, because it really does respond to so many of those issues, including including the issue of Iran. But, Ambassador, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And tomorrow night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu goes on the record. He'll be right here. And, of course, he just met in the Oval Office with President Obama. So now it's our turn. We're going to talk with the Prime Minister one-on-one. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern. Do not miss it. Now to some more bad news for President Obama. According to a just-released Fox News poll, almost two-thirds of Americans, 64%, say the Obama administration does not have a clear strategy for defeating ISIS. And joining us, our political panel, ABC News political director Rick Klein, Washington Post Philip Bump, and the National Review's Rich Lowry. Rick Klein, the numbers, very disappointing for the president.
No question they're disappointing, and it highlights the conundrum for the president, which is that the public's actually on board for what he's doing. They're just not on board for the way that he's doing it. And the case has been made before the president even tried to make it, that ISIS need to be struck, that something dramatic had to happen. And now the public is seeing that and responding to it and saying to the president that you're not doing it fast enough. So I'm really struck by how ready the American people seem to be to take the fight directly to ISIS. Traditionally, you need a president who kind of makes that case. The public's been there for a while.
You know, Philip, it's sort of weird, though, is that by virtue of the numbers in this poll, this Fox News poll, 26% are the only ones. Only 26% think the president has a clear strategy to defeat it. Yet, in a Washington Post ABC News poll, it says that overall, do you approve or disapprove of the way Barack Obama is handling the situation involving the insurgents known as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria? The approval rate is 50%. They say he doesn't have a clear strategy, but they approve of the way he does it. Now, that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the difference there. I mean, I think part of it is the fact that people, for a long time, had said what they wanted to see in a response to the Islamic State was airstrikes, and airstrikes are happening. I think people have demonstrated over and over again, including in this Fox News poll, that airstrikes are what they like to see. I think the flip side of that is the fact that the president is operating in a space in which he has a limited ability to dictate what his strategy is. He has a limited ability to say, here is what our long-term strategy is, in a way that people will understand it and accept it and respond positively to it. And, you know, I mean, as far back as last August, there's an AP poll that had similar numbers to this Fox News poll that said people basically, 29% of people said that they thought basically the government was just responding to things as they occurred. This is a long-term problem that people don't really trust that there is a strategy in place.
You know, Rich, what's sort of interesting is not really the right word, but I mean, maybe disturbing is the right word, is that there's a lot of American attention on ISIS. If you listen to the Prime Minister when he spoke of Netanyahu last week, he said that winning ISIS is winning the battle. It's not the war. You know, would you ever let ISIS enrich uranium? It seems like all the attention has been shifted to ISIS, yet we've got this much larger problem looming out there. And what's the president's strategy for that?
Right. Well, I think it's also very lacking in that regard. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a very compelling case in that way. I just think, Greta, this poll and so many other indicators we've had, it speaks to the astonishing hawkishness of the public on this issue, particularly ISIS. And I think President Obama's strategy was in part driven by what was happening on the ground, but in part was intended to catch up with public opinion. And what this poll says, he hasn't caught up yet.
Rick, it seems that, I mean, the president, at least at the 60 Minutes, says that, you know, we shorthand and say that he's casting the blame on the intelligence community, that they didn't estimate it. But you go back and you read the article that even Senator McCain wrote almost a year ago. I mean, he predicted this. Even the president's own people were predicting this. You know, what in the world is going on? I mean, at some point you would think that he would have begun to panic, at least maybe when Fallujah fell in January.
I think it's critical to remember that people inside the administration were warning about this, and people that study this and look at it closely knew that ISIS was a growing threat. And some of the things, like Senator McCain has written, actually very prophetic in terms of how things are playing out right now. But I think the president has to explain, I think in a more broad way, what it was that wasn't exactly being delivered, because I think that's the question that was raised by him saying that the intelligence community missed it. Was he missing something? Was he not being told everything? Was he missing a critical piece here? Because a lot of people knew about this.
If he was missing before, is he missing now? I mean, that's,
Sure.
I mean, he really has he really has to, you know, build the confidence in the American people, and these polls show, even the better poll that favors him,
right,
doesn't show a lot of confidence.
No, that's true. I mean, I think one of the most astonishing things about the Fox News poll is the fact that there was a CNN poll at the beginning of last month that showed that people were negative 23 on ground troops going in to fight the Islamic State. Now it's positive 10, meaning there's been a 33-point swing in favor of ground troops. That is something that the president has said repeatedly he's not going to do, in part, I think, because he didn't want to get ahead of where political support was. Now this Fox News poll suggests political support is there. It'll be fascinating to see if the administration, if the government changes as a result.
Panel, thank you.
Thanks, Greta.
This is a Fox News alert from Capitol Hill to the White House. Big news in the case of a U.S. Marine jailed in Mexico. Today, a House committee holding a hearing on Sergeant Andrew Tamarici. More on that House hearing ahead, but first to the White House. Fox News Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry joins us live. Ed, you had a discussion about Sergeant Tamarici today with the White House.
That's right, because today, that very important hearing you mentioned on Capitol Hill, Sergeant Tamarici's mother there, Montel Williams, other veterans who have been trying to highlight his cause, pointing out that he is suffering from PTSD and that he has not gotten treatment for several months since he's been in that Mexican prison. Now, remember, outside of this case, President Obama has publicly said that he wants to deal with PTSD, doesn't want veterans suffering from that, wants to do everything he can to help. So I asked Josh Earnest a simple question as to the White House and what they might do to intervene here, and they basically said it's up to the State Department, not the White House. Listen.
Republican Ed Royce today said that he asked Vice President Biden recently to ask President Obama to call the President of Mexico directly and get him out of jail. And he said that didn't happen. Why not?
I don't believe it has, and that's because this is an issue that is being handled through the State Department and through the existing channels at the State Department.
Now, that was a reference to Republican Ed Royce. He's been outspoken on this issue, as you know. He claims that he spoke directly with Vice President Biden recently, urged the Vice President to have President Obama call the Mexican president to try to secure the release of Sergeant Tamarici. That clearly has not happened. The White House saying it's up to the State Department, not them. Interesting, though, that Ed Royce suggested there may be some good news coming. He said that he's spoken to Mexican authorities who are taking this concern about PTSD seriously, and they are considering the release of Sergeant Tamarici.
Ed, did he say how the State Department was handling it? Because, frankly, from what I've seen, it just means the State Department's been doing some home visits. They visited him a couple times in prison.
Right. It doesn't seem like the State Department, from where I stand here at the White House, has been pushing very hard. We haven't heard about a lot of phone calls, a lot of pressure on the Mexican government. And interesting, because as the White House basically punts it to the State Department, and look, they do that on various issues. But in this case, let's remember, as you know better than anyone, there's a White House petition that citizens have put out on the White House website, had well over 130,000 signatures last time I checked, urging the president to get personally involved. Obviously, we have to understand the context. The president is dealing with all kinds of crises right now. You've been cataloging it throughout this hour. You've been doing it every night in recent weeks. There's a lot of issues he's dealing with. But clearly, there are a significant number of Americans saying this should be important as well.
Indeed. And, of course, he did speak to the president of Mexico last summer, didn't bring up Tamarici, and this would precede a lot of the extra things he's had added to his plate. But he could have done it a little bit earlier. But anyway, that's just me. Anyway, Ed, thank you.
Good to see you, Greta.
And coming up, we're going to take you inside that Tamarici hearing on Capitol Hill. You will hear what the Marine's mother and TV host Montel Williams told Congress. Then Sergeant Tamarici's lawyer joins us live from Mexico. He has additional big news. That's all ahead. But first, Karl Rove. He says President Obama should accept that he is a wartime leader, whether he likes it or not. Karl Rove is here next.